So,
Tom.
um,
Wow, that was awesome.
so tonight, we are, since we're considering a council-based form of government, which many of us are not as familiar with as other forms, we wanted to get the insights of Mayor Narkewicz and Town Administrator Sullivan on that form of government compared to the town meeting form we currently have. And we hope to get some insights as well on the mayor versus manager form of the executive branch. On Monday, I sent a set of general questions which are listed at the top of this questions for mayor-manager panel sheet that I handed you. And those include, what are the benefits and trade-offs you see in a council-based form versus a town meeting-based form of government? How do citizens participate and have their voices heard in a council-based form? How do a mayor and a council work together? What are their respective roles? A question we've been wrestling with is how can we balance political accountability and professional management on the executive side? So the sense being that a mayor would have political accountability and a manager would have professional management expertise, but that how do those trade-offs work in actuality? And in general, the mayor versus manager as chief executive, what do you see as the benefits and trade-offs of each? So those questions I sent in advance. Additional questions came in from the committee, and I sent those out today. So I'll just and just to let you know that those may be coming in the Q&A portion. Who runs the day-to-day oversight of departments, including hiring and firing of personnel? What efforts in your municipality result in the greatest and most successful citizen participation? Some people in Amherst are concerned that a mayor-council system is more likely to be corrupt or under the influence of moneyed interests than a town meeting manager system. Do you think that's the case? And is money a big influence on elections in your towns? What experience and training did you bring to your respective positions when you ran for those? How easy or difficult has it been to recruit people for boards, committees, and commissions in municipalities to increase diversity on them? And can you provide any advice on aspects of your municipal structure that has been unusual and successful that we could adapt as we work on building a new charter? Any advice that you would have that we should try to avoid? So obviously we could talk for about a week and a half on those questions, but I just want to give those to you as sort of a context of the kinds of things we're thinking about. And I thought I would just open it by letting you folks, given the task that we have, which is looking from the perspective of a town that has a town meeting, a representative town meeting of 240 people, and a select board of 5 and a town manager, considering moving to a council and mayor. What are your reflections on that, based on the kinds of questions that I've indicated we're thinking about, and what would you say are the how does the systems you've worked in, whether as a mayor with a council or as a in your current system in South Hadley or in your system in Northampton, just any reflections you can give to us in terms of advice, ways of thinking about a council form of government, mayor versus manager. I'm just going to open it up to you to start, and then maybe we'll go for about 20 minutes if you want to have back and forth, or any thoughts you might have, and then we'll open it up to questions here from the commission. Does that make sense?
Okay.
And welcome again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Well, just to kind of give some, I know some of the questions were asked, like what's my day-to-day activity and where I come from. I was mayor of the city of Holyoke for 10 years, decided after my 5th term not to run for office. I then became the town manager of Maynard, Massachusetts, which has a open town meeting, and actually was involved in one town meeting that had about 1,300 people come to it for 25 warrant articles. I think it's still going on. It was after my tenure I left, they were still voting on that special town meeting. Then I had the opportunity to come to South Hadley. Been there for 4 years, enjoyed it a great deal. I know that you had asked what did you bring to as experience when you became, first of all, mayor. What experience you have? I was on the city council for 2 years. 88 and 89, decided not to run. Didn't enjoy that at all. I found it to be an atmosphere where ideas were traded and diluted. That was just my experience, and chose not to be part of that. I went to Worcester State, was a urban studies major there, finished at UMass. But the greatest experience I brought for becoming mayor was I spent about 5 years being a paper boy, and that's the truth, in Holyoke. I got to know people in a kind of a very personal way. You get to be that person who delivers the newspaper to the back door. No one does that anymore, but and got to see different cultures, different religions, different people in their home settings, and it was a great benefit for me when I became mayor, because I felt that I had a understanding that all people are not the same, but should be treated equally and respectfully. And so it's kind of hard to put that into terms of how being a paper boy qualified you to be mayor, but thinking back, that's probably one of the best aspects. I'll turn it over to my respected colleague here.
Okay. So obviously I'm the mayor of a city that has a mayor, city council form of government. Prior to being elected mayor 5 years ago, in 2011, I served on our city council for 6 years, or 3 terms. I started out as, so just by way of background, we have 9 wards in the city of Northampton. The city's divided up into 9 wards. So there's 9 ward councilors, and there's 2 councilors who serve at large. They represent the entire city. I started out as a ward councilor, representing Ward 4, which is in the downtown South Street area. Did that for 2 terms. I then ran, there were some retirements on the council. I ran at large and served as president of the council. And then when, I became acting mayor briefly when Mayor Higgins left, but I had already announced my intention to run for mayor when she announced she wasn't running, seeking another term. And so I was elected in 2011 to a 2-year term. We then changed our charter in 2012. We went through this process of looking at our charter. We did a special act charter review committee. We didn't do a charter commission. We did a charter review special act, which then resulted in not only the mayor and council having to approve the document, the state legislature had to approve the document, and then the voters had to approve the document under that system. So in 2012, we switched to a 4-year term for mayor. I ran for re-election to a 4-year term, and I'm now entering my 4th year of my second term. So in terms of preparation, prior to working on the city council, being a city councilor, I had worked in state and federal government, worked for John Olver, your former state rep and state senator and congressman, here at the district level for about 4 years. Actually worked in Holyoke, knew Mike from there, and then prior to that worked in Washington D.C. on Capitol Hill as a legislative aide. And I went to UMass and I was a political science major. So that was sort of my experience in terms of the council and the way our city functions. We have a clear kind of division of power. We have an executive, the mayor, who's the chief executive officer, and manages the day-to-day operations of government, hires department heads, makes appointments to boards and commissions, presents the budget. The city council, as the legislative body, it can create local ordinances, you call them bylaws, we call them ordinances, on a range of different issues. Those are submitted to the mayor for approval, and the mayor can approve or disapprove, which is sort of the equivalent of a veto, and then the council can override that in the case of a veto. The other primary role of the city council is obviously the financial check. They have to approve my budget. They have to approve any borrowing, any spending, any purchases of land, selling of land, those kinds of things. And then obviously they approve all of my nominees to serve on committees and boards. They also have approval over department heads. So all of the department heads, from the police chief to the Parks and Rec director, by charter, I appoint them, and they are confirmed by the city council.
So majority vote?
By a majority vote, yes. And so the city council and the mayor work together. Again, we work in tandem on the various issues that come before us. And my time as mayor, I think we've had a very good working relationship in terms of communication, in terms of my being accessible to the city council. Our charter requires that the mayor, if asked, must come and answer questions, but I tend to attend most of the meetings because there's a finance portion of the agenda, which is primarily stuff coming from me, so I'm there at most of the meetings. And obviously, we are all elected by the residents in Northampton, and so we are accountable to them. And if you were at our city council meeting last week, we had about 150 people there, and it was a standing room only, so we frequently hear from our constituents. Social media has aided the ability of constituents to contact me and city councilors, so we receive a lot of input. And then we also work to try to put in place best practices around how do we gather input. We have active neighborhood associations that many of our councilors work with. And in many of our planning processes, budget processes, we try to make sure that we, before we have a formal process before the council, that we try to put together good public outreach and do public forums or informational meetings. During challenging budget times, I've done town hall meetings and all of the wards to talk about issues. When we've had overrides, I've done those kinds of meetings. So that's sort of the quick overview of how our system functions.
And you've been in both a council forum and a town meeting forum, as far as an executive working with a town meeting versus an executive working with a council. What would you say are the differences?
Well, first, I think it goes without saying there's 351 different styles of government in the state of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Holyoke is much different, has a much different culture, has a much different history than Northampton. When Mayor Higgins was mayor, I was also mayor of Holyoke, and we often compared scorecards, and it was very interesting because Holyoke, for instance, there's, if I can remember right, there's 7 ward councilors, and there's 8 at-large councilors. There's 15. It's one of the largest councils in Massachusetts. I think Everett's the only one who is bigger, and they actually have a bicameral form of government in Everett, where they also have a common council that disperses with different actions in that community, along with the mayor. So in Holyoke, the mayor appoints people, or tries to appoint people. As far as Mayor Narkewicz mentioned, the mayor is responsible for the financial stability of the community and the budgetary process. Oddly enough, in Holyoke, the auditor is appointed by the city council, the treasurer is elected, the tax collector is appointed by the city council, the assessor is appointed by the city council, the town clerk is elected, the you do get to, as mayor, to appoint the procurement officer, purchasing agent. That's a lot of help. But when you're trying to maintain a budget and all the other people are responsible to another body, it makes it a little bit disjointed. The mayor, traditionally in Holyoke, has not had the same relationship that Northampton mayors have had with their council, very interestingly enough. And I think Mayor Narkewicz would agree with me that when you talk to other mayors across the state, his is very different than most mayors. Most mayors have a challenging, difficult relationship with their city councils, or boards of aldermen, or whatever the term is for them in each community. And it's around the politics of the world. It's nothing else than that. It's not personal, it's just, you often feel as though there's 15 people ready to run for your job. Or are political adversaries in some way. You know, if you are able to adopt and emulate what has happened in Northampton, you should go for it. It's a great form. But I will just caution you across the state, that's not what we see or hear. We just had the MMA conference over the weekend, and I got to spend some time with some old colleagues that were our mayors, and some new colleagues that are managers, and it was very interesting to hear those conversations and how they are really different. The fabric of the conversations are distinctly different. When you go to a mayor's conference and you go into the mayor's meeting, annual meeting, a lot of conversation about how they don't get along with their city council and this person. You go to the select board meeting, or you go to the managers meeting, and there's a lot of conversation about training and being part of ICMA and how that can help your community, and as you mentioned, the professionalism. And please don't mistake that for saying that mayors aren't professional. They're very professional, they're very successful, but it is a different texture, it's a different fabric in every community. And you know, I've known mayors in Greenfield and Leominster. We were just talking about the mayor in Leominster, I think has been mayor for 28 years, Dean Mazzarella.
He's the dean of
Yeah,
the delegate.
Dean Mazzarella, and he actually doesn't, most mayors do go to present their budget to city council. He doesn't, he sends them a videotape, and that's all they get. So you can imagine some of the conflict and concern that happens in that situation. But he keeps on getting voted in, and the council every year rallies and is upset with them, and it can spill over into communities to have that kind of chilling effect, or that consternation between the two groups. So I don't see it as much in towns.
So let me just follow on to that by saying, don't do what don't set it. If you're going to do a mayor, don't do it like Holyoke, because that's a really, so we have very clear delineation of authority in our charter, and that's one of the things we strive to do when we redid the charter, because there was a lot of gray area in the old charter. So for example, in Northampton, we've created sort of a professional finance team. We don't believe that, managing the city's $100+ million checkbook should be a popularity contest. So we moved away from an elected treasurer to an appointed treasurer, who has certifications and is required to meet state certifications through DOR, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we never had an elected collector. We've since merged the two. So we have a finance director for the city who's sort of our CFO. And she leads our finance team, which includes the assessor, who's the assessor, the treasurer, collector, and the auditor. I think here you call it the comptroller, and so they work again as part of my team to help me manage the day-to-day workings of the budget. The idea that you would, I would be responsible for managing the finances, but I had a team of people that didn't report to me or that I didn't hire, doesn't make sense. And so, again, that's almost a recipe for conflict. So I guess I would just be mindful of that. We also took great pains in this new charter to really be clear about, this is the role of the legislative branch, this is the role of the executive, And there's actually one of the first, sentences or preambles in the charter is that the two shall never try to do the other's job. So I'm not going to do their job, and they're not going to do my job. It also explicitly says that, the council cannot give any orders to executive branch employees. Again, there can only be one sort of chief executive, one manager, and so a department head can't have 10 different people saying, do this, do that, do this, do that. So we did try to be really clear about that in our charter, because I think that's where it gets murky in a lot of cities. It's this tension between who's running the city. And again, I fully respect and appreciate the the check that the legislature provides on me, but the charter's pretty clear that the mayor is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the city. Obviously, I need funding to do that. I need budget approval. I need those big department head approvals, et cetera, the appointments. But in terms of the day-to-day, the mayor in Northampton functions much like a town manager, including negotiating contracts, collective bargaining, all those kinds of functions that a manager, city manager, or town manager would carry out. So that would just be my, but I do see that in some communities, there can be sort of this constant conflict around those roles. So I think whatever you decide on, just be really clear to delineate those goals as those roles as clearly in plain language as possible, so there can be no misinterpretation.
Could you also expand a little bit on the role of the council in terms of communicating with the wards, or what's that relationship in terms of the neighborhoods and the council and the mayor?
Well, every I'm sure, much like in Amherst, not every neighborhood or ward is identical in terms of the geography, the density, the makeup of the population, and so the various ward councilors generally develop their own style and method for how they do outreach. Some wards have very active neighborhood associations. Ward 3 neighborhood associations, very active. Ward 6 has an active one. Others, communicate more through listservs, ward listservs. Some councilors do ward newsletters. Some have, do ward meetings, and often it's issue specific. If there are, important neighborhood issues, a development in a neighborhood, et cetera, then they do those kinds of meetings. So generally, there's nothing in the structure of our charter that says, this is how a city councilor must contact their constituents, but obviously you've been elected to represent your neighbors in the ward that you live in, and if you're not responsive to them, and you're not visible and accessible to them, then generally they'll choose other representation. And folks in Northampton, like Amherst, are not shy about sharing their thoughts and ideas, and are passionate about local government. So it's a very active community. I represented Ward 4 and had a listserv, and that listserv has been sort of handed down to other councilors, and I'm still on it, and it's still just as active in terms of people wanting to talk about issues, from foreign policy issues to state policy to the tree that fell on Revelle Avenue, and somebody should report that.
That's a good follow-up.
Sure. We can
This is really
start to
interesting.
probe this a little bit.
Two things about the ward councils. Is there an expectation that if they're active and have agendas and so on, that town staff would go, if asked, for 10 or 15 minutes to speak on a particular topic? Is there that dynamic where there's actually an interaction with town staff or city? And in Cambridge, we all know the place where we went to visit, which I did, but the Cambridge city staff go to these meetings when asked. They'll get an agenda that says, 7:10 to 7:30, the budget director will such and such.
We certainly, again, as I said before, under our charter, councilors can request information, and part of that is requesting that department heads or city staff appear before them or come before committee meetings, et cetera. And frequently that includes, neighborhood meetings. We just had an issue in one of our wards where the city is working to acquire and protect some land, and as part of that, we're working with Habitat for Humanity to develop some affordable homes. And so a neighborhood meeting was convened, and our director of planning appeared at that neighborhood meeting. Similarly, we'll have issues for where a neighborhood may be having an issue with public safety, and our police chief or fire chief may come, would be invited and appear to talk with residents about a specific issue. So that definitely happens all the time.
So one of the things that's interesting then is that you really appreciate that you've both made this point, is that some of it is about the culture of the community and not just what's in the charter.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Is there any
yeah.
observation about what makes those ward associations work and what doesn't? Is there a town staff whose responsibility it is to keep them informed, or is it just active citizens that happen to live in one?
It tends to be, at least from my experience, it tends to be active citizens. Like, we don't have a governmental framework that creates them or requires that they exist, but it tends to just be really active citizens who, as I said, the Ward 3 is probably one of the most well-developed. That's sort of in the neighborhood on sort of downtown, heading east toward the bridge, like the fairgrounds area, that area. And they have, representation from the various parts of their ward. They have an executive board. They have monthly meetings, and others may just have an annual, twice a year, meeting potluck or something to bring residents together. So it really runs the gamut, and it really is dependent on the, how active the residents are and how active people want to be in those organizations. But we certainly, there's nothing that we require. I actually like it because it's much easier for me to be able to communicate with residents that way, and we've worked with them. We've done a lot of work on Pleasant Street recently, and we're doing some major redevelopment there, and we actually reached out to the Ward 3 Neighborhood Association to help us convene some neighborhood meetings to talk about re-envisioning Pleasant Street, because they have such a great network that they've developed, and they can bring people out to those meetings. So I think it's invaluable.
The last really small question, is there a feeling among the city staff of positive experience, like, oh goody, I get to, no one would ever say oh good, but that they're so pleased that Ward 3 wants to have their input, or is it, oh man, I have to go to do another one of these dang.
I think it depends on the subject matter. I think it really depends. I mean, you make an interesting point about Cambridge. Cambridge is, the mayor is really just the president of the city council, and it's a manager form of government.
He has this low, relative to other mayors.
Right. He's a ceremonial mayor at top of the house, similar to Lowell, similar to Worcester, but the manager manages the day-to-day business. But it's been, in my experience in both types, in towns or in cities, that if a neighborhood requests to have staff come, we come, we talk about things. It is a little disconcerting when you're going in a subject matter that the finger's going to be pointed at you, and you're going to be blamed for something, whether you're mayor or you're a staff person, which it's far beyond your station to control. I quickly think of one situation where we had a city councilor who wanted to preserve some wetlands, and went out of her way to make sure that these wetlands were preserved. Well, the wetlands were preserved, beavers built a dam, and beavers moved into the neighborhood, and there was reports that children were getting chased by beavers, which has never happened in the natural world. And this same city councilor came back and said, we need to kill the beavers.
But it's illegal now.
Yeah, well, it's not, but you can trap them.
You can shoot them, but you can't try to let them loose.
Kill traps you can still use, I believe.
So any more hints about this?
that?
We're really interested. Sorry.
That's your fourth question.
I'm sorry.
Let's pass it around.
Thank you.
But I do, before we open it further, Former Mayor Sullivan, you've worked it with both, you have a representative town meeting now in South Hadley.
Right.
How many people in that one?
120.
120. And you've worked with councils
City
as
council's
a
50.
as a manager. How would you compare working with, being an executive, working with a representative town meeting versus working with a council?
Well, my work with the council was as an elected official, so.
In Holyoke.
In Holyoke.
But didn't you work in Wakefield?
In Maynard, it was an open
Oh,
town
it was
meeting.
open, okay.
But I have kind of observed and watched the Palmer Forum and the East Long Meadow Forum, where there is kind of a hybrid. I was involved or got to participate in some of the conversations with East Long Meadow, and it seemed that most people there were concerned that what if the town wasn't big enough to have somebody of quality run for the office for the money that was going to be paid? Are they going to, if you're making $150,000 a year, you're going to give up your day job to become mayor at $65,000 or $70,000? That's a real life consideration. We can all have these high expectations, but the reality is that going to be enough? Are you going to have enough of a pool in a smaller community to get the quality of person that you need? And
my question was the other way around about the legislative side, the council form versus the town meeting form. What's your experience as a manager working with those forms?
I don't have any experience working with as a town manager with a council.
With a town meeting versus a council, you don't have that experience? Okay.
No.
I thought you could give us some of that perspective.
No, I think it's interesting. They often have more meetings. It expedites process quite a bit.
That's the council.
With the manager council form or with the mayor council form.
Yeah.
If you have a special tax assessment that you would like to approve for a business, just using that as an example, you have to wait till a special town meeting or maybe the next annual town meeting. You might have to wait, whereas the council is going to be meeting in the next couple of weeks, and you'll be able to expedite that. And I think even in the city forum, one of the great advantages is that if there's really something pressing, you can move it along very quickly. Now, for the people that are opposing what you're going to do, they say that that's not a good thing, that it should slow down and go.
How does planning and zoning work in a council form of government? Do you have a planning department, a planning commission, or do you have a planning board, or is the council the planning board, or?
In Northampton, we have obviously we have a professional, an Office of Planning and Sustainability with a certified planner and planning staff. Then we have a planning board, and we have a planning board, and we have obviously a zoning board and a conservation commissioner, sort of the three primary regulatory bodies. Those are all appointed bodies, appointed by the mayor, confirmed by the council to staggered terms, and they are they're the ones that both, in the case of the planning board, they do site plan reviews, they do special permits. Most of that has been delegated. The city council, other than landfills, if you were reading about that a few years ago, and I think clubs or something like that, most of the rest of the zoning responsibility rests with the planning board. They also, when they work on our master planning process, they can propose zoning amendments, ordinances. If a councilor were to propose a zoning amendment, it gets referred to the planning board for a recommendation. The zoning board has a little bit more narrower than it does here, primarily looking at appeals to the building commissioner and looking at findings for pre-existing conditions, things like that. But the planning board is quite prominent and quite active, and is working on both the regulatory side as well as working with the planning department to do sort of the vision, the long-term planning in terms of master planning and things like that. So that's how it functions. If a zoning ordinance is proposed, generally the planning board may recommend it, maybe the planning director may recommend it. It would have to go to the city council. There's public hearing requirements. The planning board has to hold a public hearing, which could be several nights. The council generally has a public hearing as well, and then there's a 2/3 requirement in terms of, that's under Mass General Law, to adopt zoning. So the council has to pass everything by a 2/3 majority, and obviously the mayor could veto, and you'd still have that 2/3. Well, I guess a veto wouldn't be much use if it passed by 2/3. But I'm just saying that there's a higher bar for zoning, and then all the other provisions of Mass General Law with petitions and things like that. So that's the way zoning works. And
I do think in the construct, you need to have the executive branch, whether you have a mayor form or a select board, having governance in respect to appointing a planning board. Because if, as in the case of South Hadley, the select board in Maynard appointed the planning board, and the select board, the planning board is elected in South Hadley. And to be quite honest with you, I think it creates a disjointed vision of how you're moving the city or town forward if the executive branch is, as your duly elected executive branch, is not having a real part of what you are planning and what you're planning to be. And the other thing I'll say that has adversely affected Holyoke is they've gotten into a system where the council has numerous special permits that you have to go. So if you want to put a sign up, you go to the planning board and go through all the process, and then you have to go to the council. And if it just doesn't seem to be equitable, doesn't seem to be fair. And they've grown, even since I've left over the last 7 years, they've grown in the number of special permits. So I think it's very important what the mayor is saying, that you need to have those defined functions and people responsible to a particular entity.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? With the planning part and the master plan, I think there's a Mass General Law that there has to be a master plan at some point. But I don't think there's any law that requires it to be passed by any particular entity other than the planning board. Do, in either of any of the places you guys have worked, have you seen that master plan go forward to, say, the town meeting or to the city council for extra passage? And has that, and if you have, has that requirement seemed to help get the city residents or the town residents on board with the plan and make it feel like their own, or is there other ways that can be done?
I would say yes, in all three of my experiences, it's gone before the legislative branch and it was passed. I would say that citizens are not usually the people who are off the rail on master plans. It's the interpretation, and it's usually interpretation by other elected officials. They look at the plan. The plan is usually very heavy in narrative. So the different interpretation of the master plan. I'm sure Amherst's master plan, you read something and somebody else reads it and they see it completely different than you. That's always the difficulty, and part of it is education, trying to get people to see what was meant by the master plan.
We also have brought all of our master plan, our primary master plan, and then many of our like transportation plans, et cetera, to the city council for an endorsement vote as well. Obviously, it's not a requirement, but we think it's important to have that buy-in from the highest elected body in the city. So if you look at most of our plans, there'll be the planning board vote, and then typically there's the city council vote. We have a transportation and parking commission. If it's a transportation plan, they'll endorse it. So we have an energy and sustainability commission. They've endorsed aspects. So we try to make sure we're getting broad buy-in from the various bodies with jurisdiction. that are supposed to play an advisory role. So it's important that they can weigh in on those plans.
Does your council have subcommittees?
They do. And,
a lot or a few?
They do, and it's something that the new council, current council's been working to refine. They have a council on finance. I know, here you have a finance committee, so they have a finance committee that they will, all of my, orders for, borrowing, transferring, get reviewed, and recommendations are made by the finance committee. They have a committee, used to be called the ordinance committee, now it's called legislative matters, but essentially any piece of legislation that comes to the council gets referred to this committee, which can then have hearings and consult with the city solicitor and deliberate and then make a recommendation. Sometimes you have they have a committee that on city services that basically provides oversight over the various not oversight of the departments, but has interface with the departments to have a good understanding of what's going on and what issues are happening in each department. And then there's one on public works and utilities. The city council, one of the things I did most recently when I reorganized city government is I eliminated our board of public works, and in response to that, the city council formed a public works committee, and so now the city council and mayor approve our water and sewer rates, so those get referred to that committee. So they do have various committees of jurisdiction, and sometimes something will get referred to multiple. There's also broader city committees and commissions that the council may refer things to, everything from the Human Rights Commission, they may want feedback from the Transportation, the Energy Commission.
But those are outside of the council?
Those are outside of the council, but the council will sometimes refer them just to get a recommendation from a body that's working in a certain area.
A number of Amherst residents have expressed concern about the possibility of corruption in a mayor-council system. We've heard comments from people who have heard about mayors being indicted in New Jersey or Florida or Palm Springs. Do you think that there is something inherent in a mayor-council system that makes it vulnerable to corruption? And have you seen in your cities safeguards against this? And what is the history in Massachusetts of small town corruption?
Well, it's just the nature of the beast. You do fundraising to raise money for your election, and the only safeguard against that is honesty. And you have to realize that there's appropriate donors and there's donors that are inappropriate, and there's ways to accept donations that are appropriate and ways to accept that you shouldn't accept donations. And there's been mayors in the 60s and 70s in both Holyoke and Chicopee that have I think there was a famous one from Chicopee that said, "What, no envelope?" And caught by the FBI on tape. That wasn't actually that long ago. It was 2008, 2006. So person, no, 2004. Person served a prison term, and Mayor Perez in Hartford took money from a contractor. I can't say it's any different with dishonest town administrators, town managers. If you have if you elect a dishonest person or you hire a dishonest person, the end result is going to be the same thing.
Mayor?
In Northampton, I'm not familiar with any major, corruption that's happened over our time. I'm not, at least in my memory. Obviously we have to comply with not only with the state campaign finance laws, but we've actually, I think we're the first community in the Commonwealth that actually, when the We've created some local campaign finance laws. When the state raised the donation limit from 500 to 1,000, we enacted an ordinance basically keeping Northampton's at 500. We didn't go to the $1,000 donation. We obviously have to, my finance reports are submitted electronically to the state Office of Campaign Finance. So they're available. You can pull them up on your computer right now. You can see everybody that's donated to me. If it's over a certain dollar limit, you can see what they do for a living. So we have to abide by all of those rules. We make sure all of our employees take ethics the ethics training every year. But I think Mike's right. I mean, if you go and look through the ethics rulings against members, against officials, there's not just a list of mayors. There's plenty of select board members that or other city officials who brother-in-law has a contract or those kinds. They get caught up in those kinds of issues. So I don't know that there's any perfect system. I do want to say we also have the open meeting law, which the city council is held pretty strictly to in terms of no deliberation outside of a public meeting, no deliberation via email, etc. I will say that I was a little surprised to learn recently. This is again, I've never worked in a town meeting system, that town meetings are exempt from the open meeting law, and specifically that a representative town meeting would be exempt from the open meeting law, which to me, I don't want to say it's corruption, but it seems like more of a recipe for manipulation and for doing things outside of the public's view. I think that's where you get into problems, is when there's no transparent, when things aren't done in the public's business isn't done in public. So we are very attentive to open meeting law and making sure that decisions are made publicly and that public records are made available. So that's the best that I can say about that.
Thank you. So what I hear you're saying is that there is nothing inherent in a mayor-council system that makes it more vulnerable to corruption than other kinds of systems.
That would be my contention.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I would also add, there's that unknowing. I know when I was working in Maynard, I endorsed the now mayor of the city of Holyoke, and all I did was write a letter saying that I endorsed him, and it appeared in the paper, and the next day as a town manager I was brought before the Ethics Commission because it's unethical for a town manager. The mayor can endorse any other mayor or anybody running for office. There's another layer of regulation on town managers. I can't donate campaign, I can't run a fundraiser at my house. Mayor Narkewicz can run a fundraiser for a gubernatorial candidate. I can't, my name can't appear, I can't donate. And I learned that the hard way.
We unfortunately have to have other business that we have to do tonight. I'd love to keep picking your brains on this, but I'm wondering if we can wrap up with putting imagining you were on this commission and what you know of Amherst and what you know of your communities. What advice would you have for us in terms of things to think about as we're going forward with our charter deliberations?
If you can get Northampton style of mayor council, if you can get to that point and you can get someone like Mayor Narkewicz, you'll do really well. You'll do very well. But I think you're being very diligent, and I hope the citizens of Amherst appreciate that. I'm sure they do, about looking at different forms and what forms work and what forms don't work. There's a lot of bad forms of mayoral government out there, and there's a few town forms that are a little bit astray too. But Northampton over time has done it right, and they've had great leadership. My experience with Mayor Higgins and now with Mayor Narkewicz, you can get that recipe.
Obviously I'm a little biased towards Northampton's form of government. And I think the key though is, to having that clear delineation of roles. And if you're gonna create an executive, don't ask the executive to manage, him or her to manage with, one hand tied behind their back. You've got to give them the authority to do that. Put strong checks on them, but I would advise against creating sort of this diluted mishmash in terms of having everything be decentralized. I think it's important in terms of the efficiency, in terms of a clear accountability. There's no question in the city when the roads aren't plowed properly, or there's other related issues, where the buck stops. It stops, with me and whoever the mayor is. Obviously, the city council has a role to play in that, but it's a pretty clear line of accountability, and people know who's accountable. And in terms of
Their role is to give out the mayor's number.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And say what a scoundrel he or she is. So no, I think that it's whichever route you choose. I from my role being a legislative aide, I think I talked to you about this when I worked for John Olver, and basically worked with him in the 4 counties working on economic development projects. I can say that it was easier to work with communities that had a mayor as a central figure, because there was one person you knew that you could go to talk to get information, as opposed to some communities where things were dispersed. And it was, so in terms of trying to understand the vision for the community, where the community's headed, what the needs of the community are, I think yes, you're entrusting a lot of authority in one person, but you're electing them, and they're in the public's eye, and they're accountable pretty much 24/7. And if you don't like the direction in which they are moving your community, then you remove them and replace them with someone else. So that would just be my advice. I think the mayor council has worked in East Hampton, I think. But again, whichever way you choose, I would just be clear about delineating the roles very clearly, and I wouldn't go with a weak executive or a ceremonial executive. You mentioned some of those other mayors. We call them fake mayors usually because again, they're there to cut ribbons, and they're usually elected by the city council. I know Cambridge, it took them 4 or 5 months to elect a mayor once, because basically they're choosing from amongst themselves, and they had a series of runoff elections because they couldn't decide who was going to be the mayor. But at the end of the day, the city manager is the one who's hiring, firing, making decisions, managing the budget. So whichever you choose, I'd just make sure that you're giving them the authority to be successful on behalf of the community.
So I don't want to ask another question, but
But you do.
this was extremely helpful. No, I'll ask you a question. This was very, very helpful. We didn't begin to touch on a whole bunch of things, which I'm sure everybody's got a comparable list of things we wish maybe we could find some way to come back to talk with Narkewicz and Manager Sullivan, some other, I don't know, it was just, it was very helpful. Maybe
I could
in
do
the spring we
remote
could do this
participation
again.
from somebody. You want to send me to Florida, I'll even. I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry,
Maybe in
Irv.
the spring we could do this again.
As we think about the mayor-manager piece down the road, we might want to touch base if possible. But again, I think we all really appreciate your coming here and the perspectives that you bring, the experience you bring, and thank you very much.
Good luck.
Thanks.
Good luck with what you said, good luck.